So you know what they say, in for a penny, in for a pound. My last YouTube video was an excerpt of a little novelette that I wrote about the Iraq War quite a while ago. I thought I would also do the two other novelettes, so this is number 2, Convoy Home. And if anyone is curious, this is the story that got me accepted into the rather elite Iowa Writers Workshop. That's not to say you're a good writer if you go there, but it's pretty hard to get in. They accept a very small percentage of applicants. Anyway, so this novelette is called Convoy Home, and I will only read a few pages of it. Here we go. Sugar's tent felt empty. He'd packed most of his belongings and gave the rest to the Marines. The supply clerk, Private Bragg, snored quietly. The mission is nothing, Sugar thought. Attacks against us have been fewer and fewer. They're tired of fighting people who fight back. Or maybe it's a lull. Maybe they're waiting to test the Marines. The only threat, Sugar reasoned, is in the first 20 or 30 miles. And even then, if it's a roadside bomb, there isn't really much you can do. You wear your helmet and body armor properly, unlike those useless trigger-happy truck drivers we escort who sprayed and prayed every time they felt scared and then had the nerve to brag and give themselves awards as if it was heroic. Sugar thought about, quote, mitigating the threat, end quote, as the colonel would put it. Wear your equipment properly and send the dismounts to try to catch 'em. This was all well briefed and well rehearsed with the convoy. There is nothing else. Sugar imagined the infantry guys piling off the backs of the Humvees, advancing, bounding through ditches and fields. They'll be motivated. This is their last chance to get some. There's really nothing else, Sugar told himself. He resettled in his cot, determined to sleep. He'd made sure everyone knew the nearest evacuation points for each leg of the trip, the frequencies and call signs for the convoy, and for the other bases they'd be passing along the way, breakdown procedures, actions on contact, and what was expected of the advanced party. Organizing information and briefing it had become automatic to Sugar. He learned from his commander how to ask questions. He'd point to the map with the tip of his pen. You, what's your job when we get here? Don't just say the words, make them understand. It's like jumping out of a plane, Sugar thought. The first bunch of times you worry, and then you realize that it ain't up to you. You can don your parachute carefully, no twists, ensure nothing gets caught up as you shuffle to the door, but you can make a good strong leap from the plane, and the rest just isn't up to you. It's a roll of the dice. Someday in the distant future, after Helen visited the mountains with him, he'd show her the journals he kept in Iraq and reveal to her the last few chapters of his heart. He didn't want to carry the weight of these experiences alone. When Helen drove him to work for the last time, his packed duffel bags in the trunk, Sugar sat uncomfortably in the passenger seat, and she laid it in his lap, an easy fastball down the middle of the plate. I've always fantasized about saying goodbye to a lover, she said, and him not wanting to let me go and finally telling me how much he loves me before he has to leave. Sugar stared at the side of the road as it flashed by and said nothing. From the moment she drove away from the barracks, leaving him and his 2 duffel bags, every experience felt like a swallowed bubble. It was all still inside of him, swelling and pressing, needing to be shared. He'd tell her about his friends, Coleman, Rogers, Darby, about Private Bragg, the farmer they'd accidentally killed, and visiting their families afterwards, about the Iraqi policemen, and how they all did nothing but stare the first time a man ran out into the middle of the street with an RPG, took a knee, aimed carefully at them. The man, boy really, looked so determined, trying to keep himself together as he saw things through to the end. He exploded in a burst of smoke and chunks of himself, probably from a faulty round, startling the transfixed soldiers into loud, shameless laughter. Sugar smiled to himself. His eyes now shut. No, he thought, that one I should keep to myself. Don't mention the laughter. He wanted her to admire him the way she had. After they'd started dating, she left a note in his car's windshield wiper. You're my hero. Love, Helen. P.S. You look hot in uniform. He wanted to be a hero, especially hers. It was still dark when the colonel addressed the men of the convoy, telling them to stay focused and be proud of what they'd done. The chaplain said a prayer and left with the colonel. It was Sugar's show. Let's go, he said. Private Bragg, his driver, sat waiting with his hands tucked into his body armor, staying warm. He wore bulky goggles beneath his helmet and a brown scarf around his face. Only the tip of his nose was visible, and his eyes calmly attentive inside his goggles. You ready for the last mission? Sugar asked. Oh, yes, sir, Bragg answered slowly. Sugar liked Bragg. He was the supply clerk, not an infantryman. But he listened carefully and did not pretend to know things. Just as the colors of things became apparent in the earliest light of dawn, Sugar finished the last radio check, and the convoy of 3 trucks and 20 Humvees lurched forward. The dew that fell during the night had drawn the salt from the ground. It formed in tiny crystals over the fields and looked like a dusting of snow. Sugar and Bragg each chambered around in their M4s as they left the gate. The convoy included a contingent from each of the battalion's infantry companies. Redeployment by thinning lines, it was called. Plus medics, mechanics, and staffers. Fobbits, they called them, guys who never left the fob. They drove, and Sugar could feel the distance from the meat factory, a place he'd never return, increasing behind him. Young Lieutenant Malvesti led the advanced party. He was from another company. Malvesti joined the battalion after they'd already been in country a few months, but he seemed earnest and somewhat competent. The kid struggled at first, thinking, as many of the new ones do, that his job was to do many things, but he learned quickly, and now did the few important things well. Sugar imagined the heavy echo of a distant 50 cal, followed by Malvesti's excited chatter over the radio. The convoy drove down the familiar market, where goat carcasses hung by their hind legs in bamboo stands. Fully veiled women groped eggplants and examined chicken eggs. Roosters fluttered in their cages. 4 policemen loitered at the entrance of the police station, 2 leaning against a Jersey barrier and 2 sitting on the curb looking like bums. One had an AK-47 in his lap. Sugar recognized them, but didn't know their names. It would have been nice to learn their names, he thought. The young one whose shirt was too big for him, and the one who'd been very warm towards Sugar ever since Sugar allowed him to handle his M4 and peer through its optics. The smiling one who wanted to know everything about America. Sugar wanted to yell. He wanted to lean out of the window up to his waist and yell at the top of his lungs, "So long, you fuckers! So long and good fucking luck. I can't help you anymore. You better learn what you don't know pretty goddamn fast, because it ain't my goddamn problem anymore." Instead, he smiled and waved, and they waved back. The one who'd been warm towards Sugar recognized him and made a motion with his fingers like he was smoking a cigar. And then they were gone, vanishing quickly toward the horizon along with the rest of it. It would have been nice to learn their names, Sugar thought. He reminded himself to scan for threats. Tiny American bases stood along the highway, the military police responsible for the route patrol. Sugar imagined their lives, such small bases. He wondered how many soldiers there were at each. 20, 10, 5. He wondered about the possibility of them getting overrun. There was nothing around these bases, so the fields of fire were excellent from the guard towers. He imagined the guard tower's machine gun reaching out to maximum range in any direction, and wondered how adept the MPs were at correcting a jam, changing an overheated barrel, loading a fresh belt of ammunition. The thoughts came automatically to Sugar. He wondered about their radios and procedures for responding to an attack. He imagined how the enemy watched these bases and where they could move undetected to place a bomb at night. Malvesti's platoon, the advanced party, was parked on the first highway overpass, waiting for the rest of the convoy to pass through a danger spot before speeding forward again. Malvesti stood with an elbow on an open door of his truck, holding the hand mic to his ear as casually as could be. He pointed a finger pistol towards Sugar's truck as they passed. The morning mist burned away, and the sun changed from red to gleaming white. Sugar dripped with sweat. He sat crookedly in his seat, as usual, so the chest plate of his body armor faced the shoulder of the road. His back ached, and the barrel of his M4 rested on the edge of the cut in the steel that formed the window. He watched the country flash by beyond it. The radio's hand mic was tucked under his chin strap, pressing against his ear. On his lap he had the collection of maps folded to fit together between two sheets of plexiglass. Sugar ticked off their progress. He leaned toward his driver and shouted over the Humvee's rattling, "How you doing, Bragg? You want some water?" "I'm fine, sir. Got me some right here." Bragg had pulled off his scarf and gloves. The convoy drove in the middle lane, slow enough that Iraqis passed them on both sides. They'd ease toward the convoy, smiling and waving the way they always did, as if to say hello, or thank you, Americans, or please don't kill me, or hooray, or all of these things at once, or none of them, before lurching forward and accelerating past the convoy. It no longer mattered what they said. That was somebody else's problem now. Sugar scanned the passengers and didn't smile back. He scanned the side of the road ahead of him and whatever structures they passed. He saw places where gunmen could hide or move back and forth. He saw doors, fruit stands, and thin walls that didn't matter far as bullets were concerned. And he saw the heavier walls that would provide cover against small arms fire. He imagined the big .50 caliber machine gun chopping through them. He saw it all without thinking. One Iraqi driver passed the convoy with a boy in his lap. They gave the convoy a thumbs up. A woman's eyes turned toward him from the back seat, eyeliner coming to sharp points in the corners of her eyes like an ancient queen. Her painted lips parted slightly, her veil had fallen open, and she stared with shameless, lustful curiosity. Sugar looked at the round moon of her face, smooth skin, defined eyebrows, and Arab nose. He wondered how he must look to her. Weapons, armor, electronics, part of a machine. Her eyes took in the convoy, the big machine guns above the turrets, the rattling ammunition cans mounted beside them. Sugar's Humvee, with its crude steel doors, his helmet, his body armor, electronics, his M4, Sugar himself. There was no fear in those eyes, no pretense. Those eyes were not afraid of his elaborate power. But I'm a little afraid of hers, Sugar thought to himself. They passed the second danger area, and the third, and the last, and Sugar's mind drifted farther than it had in a very long time. In the places where the highway was good and wide and tall power lines stood, and the danger of bombs was low, Sugar felt for brief moments like he was on an American highway. He could be going anywhere. Everything was fine. Helen could be seated next to him. He saw her knees and the wind whipping her black hair. He felt her eyes on him. He imagined shopping with her at a supermarket, endless brightly colored fruits, the air clean and air-conditioned. He felt the heat of the parking lot and himself standing on the sun-baked asphalt without a plan, able to get in a car and go wherever he chose, able to drive just for the sake of driving. No convoy briefs, no rehearsals, just driving to see how far they could go. No phone or radio, no plans. He imagined driving and driving, going anywhere, nowhere. They drove past stretches as barren as could be, not a single structure or tree in sight. The road changed from highway to gravel and back several times for no apparent reason. He watched the flat, faraway horizon and the big sky above it. Everything seemed opened up from the crowded urban terrain. For the last 9 months, he'd worried about what was around the corner. Something that had grown to feel like a part of him began uncoiling itself inside of Sugar. Helen seemed just beyond the horizon, and Sugar still could not think of what to tell her.